Alright, so I don't know if you could tell, but that last pause was a bit more significant than the others. It might not actually be all that obvious, but this river or stream or whatever, or creek, whatever they want to call it, it's flooding. I don't know why it's flooding. It's been sunny all day, and I guess it was raining yesterday, but I think I would have seen that. Anyways, I've been moving the camera a lot, even though it's a rule that I shouldn't. Oh well. Here, let's be careful about not shaking it too much. I don't know if you can tell, but over there, yeah, that is usually dry. It's flooding enough that it's overflowing the stuff they have over there, which I guess makes sense why they have an indent there, just to make sure that the road or the path doesn't flood. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave the camera. Let's do. Yeah, that works. Just so you can see the flooding at work. So this is yeah. So back to the character. He is well, what it comes down to is it's wasted potential. The character is really interesting. One thing they brought up was like he escaped from a barbarian tribe as a kid, but then they use it, or the author uses him so badly. Like, they have this really interesting character in this really interesting world where they should do stuff with him. Okay, I should mention, they use the time skips. Now, I have no opposition to, like, a 40-year-old character. In fact, there are some really good ones. I'm reading a book right now with a pretty solid... It's not the best book in the world, nor is the character. But I like the character, and he's 43, and that doesn't degrade from his character at all. When they introduced you a youth, a like 14-year-old, and then make him 40, and then, all right, I'm gonna get into this, but when it comes, like, he has an interesting backstory. Like, apparently he's related to some barbarians or something like that, and he escaped, and he went and became a priest. He's not actually, and then there's a conflict part where he didn't actually seem to have much commitment to the priests. It's just that, like, they're the only ones who he had missed. Like, his only useful skill is that he's like intellectual. He's good at reading and stuff. And there's like at max like a couple of local lords might have use for someone who can read and might let and write and all that, like, occasionally. So he realizes that basically his only shot is with the church, at least with his current skill set. And he realizes that at like 14. So then like, that's okay. Like, he's going to go through with the church. And I was even okay with the plot where all right, like I said, I'm going to get into it. So once he gets into the church, and this still isn't really spoilers, you know, none of this is spoilers. You can't spoil something which is already rotten. So he goes into the church, you meet him. The Leibowitz guy, he apparently saw him in a vision, and he like pointed him to a hole in his like last year of training to become an official priest. And in the hole he found some stuff. Namely, he found he found a couple of things. One of them was like a blueprint for something, although he couldn't figure out what it is. You actually hear him talking about electronics later on. The church doesn't understand electronics really either, but he seemed like you can hear him as he discusses it with his fellow clergymen later, getting really close to the truth, and that just drives home the fact that he's a really intelligent, really well thought out character. Anyways, so he gets a blueprint, and there's this note which he believes from the vision, because it's like the Leibowitz guy who pointed him to the hole, that it's the Leibowitz guy who wrote it. Anyways, the problem is nobody believes him, and that's fine, except the fact that as punishment for his apparent lie about their like holy Leibowitz guy, is that they make him redo that last year. Which again, it's like, okay, fine. He's set back a year in what's effectively, we're going to call it, I'm going to think of it as priest high school. He's set back a year in priest high school. But he's not. He's set back 7 years. The only reason that until he recounts what he said, and he just won't, because again, well thought out character, he won't recount what he sees as truth, even after that much hardship. So we start with like a 14-year-old character. 7 years later, he's like 21 in a 14-year-old's position, and someone comes by. I forgot what happens, but more or less they're just like, "Wait, you're still there?" Like, okay, no, just go into, like, become a priest, whatever. And then as time goes on, they start to actually believe him that what he saw was legit. All right, so he goes and becomes effectively like a librarian, I guess. It has to be like several hundred years into this apocalypse, because there's some degraded stuff. Anyways, he becomes a librarian. Of course, books don't last forever. So basically his job is to copy the oldest books into new texts as closely as he can to make sure that the old knowledge isn't destroyed, which is fine. Someone's got to do it, and he seems fine with it, especially since that's effectively nonstop reading. And then someone else reads the book or something like that to make sure that he wrote it correctly. And then I assume that he also checks his fellow book rewriters, clergymen. So I'm assuming that he also reads his clergyman's work. So effectively, nonstop learning and reading, which does seem fine considering this world seems really not good. I think it might be nuclear apocalypse because the world just doesn't seem. It seems like a desert to me. And there is one part where he is in a desert, but it might not actually be a desert. So anyways, they start to believe him. They look into what he's seeing as possibly a holy thing. The reason they don't believe him initially, it's just like the main people at his the local like big church, not the main one, because apparently that would have been a miracle within their circles. But the more that they claim something is a miracle, the less likely their main guy, the Leibowitz, is to become a saint, because apparently when the main churches just claim like 1,000 things are miracles to their... Apparently every main church has its guy who they want to be a saint, or their guy who has become a saint. Now they're the church of that saint. So when they claim 1,000 things to that person, for whatever reason, the main church just doesn't recognize them. So they don't want to claim a whole bunch of stuff. So the main guy's like, there's no way this is a thing. You're lying. Let's try go back a year. And then he just does that 7 times. Which is my first, like, oh, maybe this book is going to get bad. But it didn't. I just was getting used to the fact that they handle time really weirdly. Things do not happen right next to each other. There is almost nothing which happens the next day. It's all like 4 months later or 7 years later. So eventually, anyways, he's doing this library thing. He has some spare time, and what the main old library guy says, in charge of that whole kind of department, is more or less you need to get a hobby. Basically, is what he says. Everybody here has a hobby. And it helps, more or less, it helps you stay sane, and a sane librarian is a performing librarian. Anyways, and he shows him this one guy who is really slowly piecing together books. Anyways, wow, I don't have much charge. I guess I should be fast about this. My main problem with it is, if I explained more than this, it'd probably get into... It's not spoiler, but it would get into bits where there'd be no point in reading it. I don't think there is a point in reading it, but if you want to trigger the emotion of anger in yourself, go ahead and read it. I don't want to explain any more than that, but what it comes down to is he gets a hobby. With his hobby is he's trying to recreate one of the blueprint he found in the hole Leibowitz pointed him to. And anyways, he creates it all fancy, but the problem is he doesn't have much extra time. He has like an hour a day, and he's being meticulous, but he creates this work of art, which is like a recreation of the thing Leibowitz made. It took him like 40 years, or not, he was like 20 so it took him like 20 something years. At one point he runs into problems because the old librarian guy dies, and it's sort of like his rival who becomes it, but it's not really his rival. It's just the other guy just doesn't like him that much, and he has to stop it for a little while. But eventually, he does finish it. And then they're like, "Oh, this is great. You should take it to the main church of churches to help us prove that Leibowitz is actually a saint." And he does. Along the way, apparently they just don't send him with guards or friends or anything. He runs into a barbarian kind of person who just takes it from him. Just 20 years, just takes it from him. Although he convinces the guy by like kissing his boots and groveling to him to give him what the barbarian guy sees as the piece of junk one, which is the one that in the hole that Leibowitz put him to. And he's like, "Oh, this is great. This means that like this is fantastic. This thing I spent 20 years on, it's nothing. It's the thing that Leibowitz pointed me to." I can get that. It's like the thing that Saint led him to. But my problem with it is that's like most of the book and 20 years of his life on that like piece of art, which he's really proud of, and people were saying like, "Oh, it's so great," and then it's just gone. And I realized that's what the book had been up to that point. It was just sort of crappy things happening to him that take years and years out of him, and then he's just like, "Okay," and that's the point when I realized this is a really bad book. I don't have a huge amount of battery left, and there isn't really anything else to say other than reiteration. So yeah, that's what it comes down to. I summarized the book as much as I could without spoiling it. It actually is a really well-written, well-thought-out book with a really great world and a fantastic main character. Problem is, it's used awful. I can't tell if like the author was trying to like make it just so he seemed like an altruistic person, like bad stuff happens to him and he just shrugs it off. But he doesn't shrug it off. He literally says something along the lines of, "The stupid barbarian, his unintelligence tricked him into thinking that the worthless thing that he spent 20 years on was actually the most worthwhile part of it, a part of what he was carrying." And that's honestly, the most interesting part of the book was probably ahead, where he goes to the main church area. But I just couldn't take it. I cannot. The fact that we read for several chapters as he makes this thing, and then it just gets taken. He's just like, "Okay." Anyways, Chronicle for Leibowitz, I give it, right after I stopped it, and I couldn't talk for like 10 minutes after I stopped that, just from in consternation, I guess is the best word. It was just like, well, okay, that sucked. So I don't want to call it 1 star. No, it is a 1 star. Execution, 1 star. World, 4.5 stars. Main character, 4.1 stars. I would give it more. It's just like this whole like he's just gonna shrug everything off mentality isn't really that great. But otherwise, he's like a 5-star character, background and all that. But all right, so the book is a 1 star just because the execution is so horrible. He does some unique things. He writes it really well, but in the end, the plot just makes me upset. Not angry even, just upset. So 1 star, don't read it, but if you want to get angry and you like bad books or something like that, it isn't even a funny bad book, it's just bad. It's good enough to make you know how much of a wasted opportunity it was. All right, enjoy the generalized outro. Alrighty, the first book review in a while, and there's a reason for it. First, I read this a little while ago and I needed a little while to calm down from it. Second, I wasn't sure if I should actually make a book review about a book which I just downright hated. So I want to preface this by saying I've read a lot of books, and this, alright, by the same token of I've read a lot of books, I don't feel entirely comfortable saying this is the worst book I've ever read, but I think that it certainly takes the number 2 slot at least. I can't really think of what beats this in terms of badness, but I can say that no matter what, I think this is at least the 2nd worst book I've ever read. Which is saying something. That's a list of at least a couple of 100 different books, and saying like, out of these 100 individuals, you are the worst. So, why is this the worst book I've ever read? Here's the thing. I've read other bad books, but usually when a book is bad, it's bad because it's just badly written. Maybe it's a bad plot. I read a book once, which was the most recent, obviously bad book I've read. At least the most recent, like, obviously just straight up bad. Sometimes it can be less good than other books, but the most recent, obviously bad book I've read was this book. It was trying to be teen trash, but then it was also trying to be fantasy. So it was like, oh, there's a brother and a sister, and they're dragons, except only sometimes. The rest of the time, they're teenagers who just want to hang out with their friends on the beach in Florida. And it kind of went down from there, and then it wasn't even written that good. So anyways, there's books like that which are bad merely by attribute of not having a sliver of a chance from the get-go. The problem is this book is not only well written, it has a very interesting plot. All right, well, it's in the title. You know what the book is. But it's a chronicle for Leibowitz, it's a Canticle, or something like that. I still don't know. Either way, I misread it the first time I saw it. I don't have it in front of me, so I couldn't tell you. But I misread it as a chronicle for Leibowitz the first time I saw it. I now know it's definitely not a chronicle for Leibowitz, but every time I think of it, I think of the book A Chronicle for Leibowitz. So anyways, I'm going to keep calling it that, even if I make an effort not to, I'm going to say it at least 2 or 3 more times, so I'm not going to waste my time. So, a Canticle or a Chronicle for Leibowitz. Main plot, or more or less main plot of the world it's in, is some sort of post-apocalyptic former America thing. They kind of explain it, but more or less the Leibowitz they mention is like a saint. Or maybe he's not a saint. No, I think it was that they were trying to make him a saint, or the organization that the main guy is working for was trying to make him a saint. Either way, he was a main guy within what I can only assume is the Roman Catholic Church, except it's post-apocalyptic America. The headquarters of that church seems to be somewhere in the center of the country. I think they're somewhere near Utah, because they keep mentioning the place Utah. Yeah, I think it was spelled slightly differently, but yeah, there's only so many ways to read Utah. So anyways, the problem is the world is really interesting. Well, I guess it's basically another Dark Age. The world is really sad and depressing, and there's like raiders every once in a while. It's like the Dark Age, but with less kingdoms and like huge wars, as far as I can tell. It's just sort of like villages spread across, but we pretty much stay inside of a church. One thing is it takes a really interesting perspective with how to tell the flow of time. Sometimes a few days can be a chapter. Sometimes like 40 years can be like 3 chapters. And that's the problem. That is one of the main problems. I guess the main character is also wasted potential here majorly. We meet him as, I think he's like 14 or so. Anyways, young enough to not be old. He is an acolyte or something like that. He's gone through most of the training, except there's like this final year of training in which he's basically a grunt for some one of the outer areas. Like there's a main church, and then it's outer little nearby churches. Except it's the main church and then his main church, which he spends most of his time in, is only one of the main churches. And then there's a main of the main churches, which doesn't actually seem to be Rome. But then again, I guess it makes sense given that they make one of their main figures a guy named Leibowitz. But anyway, so that's the thing. So the thing about it is they seem to